Hello, today we're looking at 1750 points of Resistance versus Shaltari. We're going to be playing a scenario from one of the Reconquest expansions. It's a little different than the usual scenario because it's not really objective based, it's demolition. I'll be playing Resistance on the attacking side and there'll be Shaltari on defense. What's going to be a perhaps fun little twist on how the scenario works is that the rules have the defender placing a single battle group directly deployed around the laser in the center of the board, with the rest deploying as typical. However, thanks to how the Shaltari access rules work, all of Shaltari's gates can be deployed around the center of the laser so long as they meet the aerial advantage requirements like usual, meaning that they could rush their entire army directly at my deployment area immediately if they so choose. Also, the duration here says 6 rounds. I think that's an error and we're playing to 8 because that's how it's described if you read farther on, and the rules in the original Reconquest book also say 8. There's also two other things that were varying here from usual. First, replacing some of the buildings described in the scenario with forests. In part, it just looks better. It might be more interesting. I don't know. The other thing that's relevant, just because this is a demolition-focused scenario, is when you destroy a building or whatever, you're supposed to replace it with a piece of tough terrain, so like rubble or whatever like that. I don't have anything good to model that, and I don't want to just have a bunch of pieces of paper with scribbles on the table. It just will look ugly, so we're just not going to do that. Now, a big part of the scenario is, of course, that laser in the center of the board. Here's the rules for it. The gist of it is just that if you have your infantry controlling it, you can shoot out a giant laser that is really good at blowing up all the buildings on the board. And so with that, we'll move on to the army lists, which were built specifically for the scenario and what we expected from our opponent. First up, HQ. The Pizarro is there with deforestation missiles because I have a lot of deforesting to do. The sappers were an obvious choice for building demolition, but as opposed to infiltrating them directly into a building, which might be a little awkward because I think they'll be very exposed and I need to destroy the building they're in at some point, I have them coming on directly in buses. So that might give them a little bit of survivability compared to what I expect from my opponent, and some mobility, but they're not going to be as effective at destroying buildings because they're hitting on 3-up versus 2-up thanks to how the battle bus rule works. And I have a Napoleon in there because it just puts out a lot of shots and should be pretty good at demolition and also just generally fighting. Oh, and I have a CV5 commander in the Pizarro. There's probably better things I could do with those points, but I really want to try to make sure I get the initiative for my frontline infantry group, resistance veterans with the machine pistol rule, and a Strikehawk with the missiles. The Strikehawk should be durable enough to get up to that laser, and the missiles can contribute to building demolition. The veterans have the machine pistols because I expect to have to chew through a bunch of Pungari to take control of that center laser. Armor Battle Group 1, 2 Trackwalkers and a Kraken, and 2 of the Hannibals with the Siege Demolition Cannon and a Lift Hawk with AA. The Attilas are interesting choices here, I think, because I expect to have my opponent up in my face immediately, so the Welding Claws should be able to have some targets pretty well. The problem with them for demolition, although they do put a lot of damage out, is that they have to be right up against the building, so if I destroy a building with them, I'd expect it to fall on them, so it's going to be a little tricky to use them for that. The Siege Cannon, I think it's pretty obvious why I have it here. Second armor group, 2 of the Cersei hovercraft. The flame weapons are there because I expect to have to flame stuff out of the laser, and they should do pretty well at also helping to clear out some forests. The cannons can also help with the skimmers I expect to see from Shaltari, and they're also pretty cheap because you don't have to worry about transports with them. Vanguard group, a barrel bomber with AA. I think this is also pretty clear. It does a great job at destroying one building in particular, and then can fly around with some AA shots. And a war engine group with a Colossus. I know this is modeled as a Juggernaut, and I actually did want to run it as a Juggernaut originally, but the 1-inch move fire on the main gun really destroys its usability in the scenario, I think. I want to be moving this thing around to get stomp attacks on buildings and enemy units, and I need to be able to get up close to get those claws to help destroy some of the terrain features. So instead, it is being run as the Colossus because all the anti-air missiles and the big nuke-style whatever missiles in the back of it should do a pretty good job at demo and just general fighting. So compared to your typical lists that you see, I think this is pretty light on infantry and on anti-air, which is due to the scenario. I don't have objectives I have to be claiming or things to fight over like that. I just need to destroy buildings, and there's only one building in particular that needs to be fought over. And so I will be able to just focus on that in particular while all my other units fight and shoot at buildings. So the game and the summary and everything is going to be from my perspective, but I'll do the best I can to describe their thoughts on their list and how they played. So for their HQ group, a Daimyo with a CV4 commander and 2 squads of the anti-air Yaris. The Yaris are there to help extend scout radius, as well as a little bit of supplementary anti-air, and also just to keep the HQ group a thing because the Daimyo will be joining into the frontline group. So frontline group, Braves for the Daimyo to join with, Pagari to be meat shields for said Braves and Daimyo. And their job is to just take control and hold that laser. So, Armor Battle Group 1. 3 arrowheads, modeled here as Atlatls because we don't have arrowhead models. A recluse, 6 tomahawks, and an alligator. So the idea here is that proactive anti-air hunting isn't really going to be that important in this scenario. So the arrowheads and the recluse are just going to sit in front of the laser entrance and discourage any attempts to get in or dislodge them. The tomahawks and the alligator, with the long range of the Gauss cannon and the extra movement and already high movement of all those skimmers, should be able to reach and touch pretty much anything, especially when you consider the aggressive deployment allowed by the scenario. Armor Battle Group 2 is more of an in-your-face brick kind of thing, and designed to also take out any infantry like the sappers that are fully expected, and correctly so, to be in my list. The Jaguar has bioatomizers to shoot infantry in buildings, and everything else will be able to either shoot infantry pretty well, or focus down stuff that's heavy up close. Vanguard Group, just some kukris to hunt down flyers. And War Engine, a lion. Well, between this and the Daimyo, I'm not confident I'm ever going to be able to actually control the laser, but we'll see how things go. So while not explicitly a battle group, I do need to talk about the auxiliary units here. So all those flyers, the 2 Spirits, the 2 Edens, and the Gaia, will be able to deploy directly in the middle of the board, so that's fantastic. My opponent will be able to pick any of them with any activation and get out whatever usual Shaltari access things. Additionally, there's a Zion there for maybe some shenanigans, I'm not really sure, but also just additional gate capacity. And there's a Shield Spire, which is going to probably plop itself down right next to the laser and make it that much harder to conquer, take over, destroy, whatever I want to do with the laser. It's going to mess with me. There is just one small issue with this list, and that it's not actually legal. It's supposed to be 1 squad of Braves, not 2. Don't really notice until after the game. It's not the end of the world. The higher CV pays off right away, where I break a tie to get the initiative on the first roll. And so I get my Pizarro infiltrated and into position to start doing demo. It's nice because having it on the board at the start of the game means I get a full 5-card hand. And they deploy all their gates right around the center of the board. At this point, I realized I could have constructed my list in such a way as to probably win the game on the first turn. With most factions, you can't shoot at air units immediately after disembarking with your own anti-air stuff. Resistance, however, has the Krakens and the Leviathans with the AA wagons on them. Those can shoot at air, and with this aggressive deployment, I could have just stacked an armor group up with a ton of AA wagons and just devastated their aerial transports right away. Granted, if they saw my list was like that, they might not have deployed all their stuff in the center like this, and then the AA wagons might have been points better spent on more demo or anything like that. I do want to take out an aerial transport while I can, so I activate the only thing that I reasonably can to do that, which is the single barrel bomber. and it has a rather successful turn, especially thanks to the play of an experimental firepower card, which I roll a 6 on, making the anti-air gun actually energy 8. It takes out an Eden, which does 4 damage, they save 1, not enough to keep it alive, crashes into the laser, inflicting 2 damage. Then the machine guns do 2 damage with 2 collateral damage on a forest, and I drop a frag bomb on the nearby building, which only inflicts 1 damage, with a collateral token. Unhappy with my high-level commander being in the field and wanting to establish a presence on my side of the board, I think, they try to fish for 6s to hit my Pizarro. They do get 2 decent hits, but both of them with the damage roll. Next up is my heavier armor battle group. The Lifthawk fires off its weapons at the nearby forest and only manages to get 2 through with the machine guns. The Hannibals, however, land, miss both of their 90mm cannon shots, but succeed at hitting both the main cannon shots at the nearby building, inflicting 8 damage with 2 collateral, and the machine guns put 2 damage at a forest. The Attilas pounce on the Walker group, but thanks to the Dream Snare, the Leopard manages to survive with 1 damage point. Shaltari take this opportunity to set up their little fortress in front of the laser entrance. My other armor battle group grows, and the 2 Circes manage to inflict 1 whole point of damage to the building next to them, and 4 damage with the flamethrowers to the nearby forest. The Shaltari infantry make their move into the laser and very thoroughly infest it, claiming the objective inside for themselves. I decide to leave the Shaltari Walker blob to the Attila and move my Pizarro a little more towards the center of the board for the influence range, and to get in range of more forests. But before moving, I claw the nearby building a little bit and send some deforestation missiles down to a Shaltari side forest. And lastly, the sappers crawl up along the edge of the board and detonate the IEDs that are in the large building at the opposite side of the table. I want to keep these as far back as possible because they have no active countermeasures and an infinite range on the demo IEDs, so hopefully they can stay hidden. And the last Shaltari activation of the turn, as the Behemoth is in reserve and the Kukri group is also in reserve. The Yari just move up the board. Next up are my 2 veteran squads and the Strike Hawk. Now, as nice as it would be to dive them into that death mosh pit in the laser, I don't expect they're going to be able to take that anytime soon. Even ignoring its current state of shielded Daimyo Pungari hell, there's going to be a line coming on the board next turn, and if I have infantry within range of it walking on, they're not going to be alive for very long. So I'm going to plan to try to wait and keep them on the edge using the Strike Hawk to do damage to the buildings until I can get that main transmatter beam weapon of the Lion. In the meantime, the Strike Hawk sends some missiles down, does some damage to a building. At the end of round 1, some collateral damage sticks around. For the initiative roll, I play Quick Strategist to ensure that I get the initiative. Next, I play Cloaking Field on my Hannibals, because I feel they're a bit exposed and they're a pretty important part of the list. At this point, I make a decision. I don't think actually bothering with the laser is going to be worth it. I'm putting out enough damage regardless, even though I don't have my Behemoth. Granted, I'm going to lose things over time, so that might equal out. But at most, the laser is going to be putting out 10 damage a turn, because thanks to the board layout, it's only going to hit 2 buildings at a time. And the laser itself is one of the buildings that has to be destroyed. So I'm going to dump my Goliath bomb into it in the hopes of blowing it up, killing off their commander, and hopefully also destroying some of the units crowded around the entrance there as the building collapses. Unfortunately, thanks to the passive saves it has from that shield spire, I only get 9 of potentially 17 damage through. In response, they play the Move 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 card and dump the Tomahawk Alligator squad out of the Zion. Said Tomahawks immediately activate and move into position to fire on my Pizarro. Thanks to playing the Move Move card, they don't have the disembarkment accuracy penalty. I still have some evasion on the Pizarro, so they play the assisted targeting card to overcome that and get 5 of 6 hits through. I play Deploy Flares as a result, and thankfully go from the Pizarro being killed to only taking 1 point of damage due to the reroll. I bring the Colossus on in the hopes that the Gilgamesh missiles will finish off the central laser. Between the snap attacks and all the other weapons firing, a bunch of damage is distributed amongst various buildings, and thanks to the passive saves of the laser, once again I don't get what I hoped through, with only 4 points going through, leaving it with 5 left. They activate their other armor battle group with walkers in it, but actually make something of a mistake without realizing it. The first thing they do is get all their aerial transports distributed around the board for any later movement. However, once those squads finish activating, I play reactionary tactics and destroy the Leopard with the Attilas before it has a chance to do anything to me. Regardless, the focus weapons on the other 2 walkers are enough to take care of the Attilas. My HQ group is up, and first I do my best to shield Bizarro from the incoming Tomahawks and possibly walkers. Additionally, fires off at a forest and the nearby building, does some good demo damage. I'm worried that next round, that nearby Eden is just definitely going to be dumping something on top of my sappers, so I move them behind the cover of the forest and fire off the IEDs at what buildings I can. We get our first building demolition and 4 damage at the large building that is shielding my Pizarro, which I don't want to overdo demo on it right now because I don't want it collapsing on my stuff, but that was the only other building that they could draw a line of sight on. The Napoleon lets loose into another building and gets 5 damage through. I also activate the Kraken and try to shoot at a Tomahawk, but just miss completely. But then I move it back to try to provide some visual coverage for the Bizarro in case the Tomahawks want to swoop in again and shoot off at it. It should have hold down positioned as it is. Lastly, I get the Lift Hawk in the air and manage to get all of 2 damage points into a forest. They get their behemoth on the board now. Nothing arranged to fire at, and thanks to the tiny 2-inch spread of it, it doesn't even damage any scenery. Hannibal's put in some work now, notably getting one building almost collapsed. The Kukris take advantage of the transmatter teleport rule on the Lion, and teleport onto the board, move up, and thanks to the fact that, last I checked, the Lion is not an aerial transport, they can shoot their AA guns. However, they do only get 2 damage through on my barrel bomber. The 2 Circe move up the board, taking out one of the newly dropped Kukri and doing 4 damage to a nearby forest, along with a bunch of collateral with their flamethrowers. The 2 Yari squads in the HQ group just move up to the middle of the board. One fires at a Lift Hawk, doesn't do any damage. At this point, I realize I'm not going to contest the laser, so my veterans should do something useful, and they actually put out quite a few energy 3 shots, which is enough to start damaging forests. So I drop the Strike Hawk after firing at a nearby building with it, put them into some nearby scatter cover, and they do a respectable amount of damage to a nearby forest. And lastly, the Shaltari frontline group. The Daimyo and their Brave squad, along with the other squad of Braves, exit the laser, leaving it to the Pungari. Their plan is to fire it off at the building at the bottom left. It's already nearly collapsed, and it's not a big deal if it gets a little bit more damage along with the forest, because the laser line will pass right over the 2 Hannibals, which in theory could destroy them both immediately. However, Pungari are not the most reliable little things, as they roll a damage roll of 1, accomplishing nothing. While most of the collateral damage tokens just burn out harmlessly, the sheer quantity on the forest here was enough to overcome the last few damage points, clearing out our first forest. So ends round 2. I was hoping to have that laser taken care of, but I think bringing it down to only 5 damage points was still pretty good. Thankfully, even with the Shield Spire, I think I should be able to take care of it, probably with an activation of the Colossus. The Shaltari haven't inflicted too much damage on me, but I think they are poised to do quite a bit in the coming round. And round 3 goes to me once more. Yet again, the barrel bomber is the first activation. I let loose the other frag barrel and it manages to wipe out half the Tomahawks. The missile battery actually gets a penetrating hit, doing 1 damage on the laser, and the machine and AA gun fire at a nearby forest. Shaltari activate their frontline group, hoping to get a shot off with the laser before I finish destroying it. However, a very well-rolled booby trap card results in the laser exploding, leaving 2 surviving Pungari and wiping out one of the adjacent arrowheads. The Daimyo and Braves and the other squad of Braves move off into transports. I'm a bit worried about that Lion, so I activate the Hannibals before they potentially get shot, and do some demo work. The Tomahawks make their move on my sappers. They destroy one of the battle buses, but luckily the sappers make it out unscathed. The alligator also moves up with them and blocks line of sight from Napoleon onto the Tomahawks to protect them. The recluse and the arrowheads just move into the center of the board. The arrowheads can discourage a little bit of aerial movement around the center, and the recluse will at least present some dissuasion from shooting anything around there. The Colossus makes a move and tears apart the alligator with the claws, mostly just to get it out of the way. The various other weapons and stomps distribute damage all over to nearby buildings and forests. The Walker Armor Battle Group is up, and they use a little trick that the Zion can enable, where the Eden moves up and lands. The Dream Snare is picked up by the Zion's ability and then disembarks from the Eden as part of its move, and that gives it those extra few inches it needs to shoot. It can still embark, disembark, and shoot thanks to the Zion's ability. With the accuracy penalty, it still just barely finishes off the two sappers, while the Jaguar puts 1 point of damage with a focused bioatomizer into the Napoleon. My HQ group goes, and first I move the Kraken over and take a shot at a building, because it's there. The sappers hide behind the forest to get away from that Dream Snare and possibly that Jaguar coming through, and fire off 8 damage with an IED down at the building off the picture here. The Pizarro moves over to the side, does 6 damage with deforestation missiles, and the Napoleon finishes off the large building on my side of the table. The Lion makes its way up and fires off its templates at the Hannibals. However, it only managed to destroy one Hannibal thanks to a critical on the glancing hit. My veterans bring the forest down to near destruction, while the Strikehawk actually takes out both of the Kukris. The Yaris in the HQ group move up, try to fire at the barrel bomber, but failed to damage it. The two Circe get in a position where they can fire off at the Tomahawks as well as flame the building next to them, get 1 damage to the building, and manage to kill a Tomahawk. Collateral brings down a forest and a building, and does a sprinkling of damage elsewhere, and so ends round 3. Shaltari get initiative this time, but in response I play Shock Assault and activate my Napoleon. I also play assisted targeting on it after some absolutely abysmal hit rolls, and take out the Dream Snare and a Tomahawk. The Lion makes a move on the Colossus, and so Behemoth on Behemoth begins. It does 4 damage to the weapons, crippling them, causing 2 Gilgamesh missiles to be lost, and 1 extra damage to the legs. The Shield Spire also activates in the nearby forest, because it has nothing else better really to do. Amusingly enough, the Colossus actually suffered literal crippling damage. The back leg of the model broke off, and so I took this as an opportunity to do a little adjustment on the posing too as I fixed it. The Lion is just out of reach of the claws of the Colossus, and if it keeps its full movement, it will be able to just dance right outside claw range. So I dump the Beowulf pods and the chain guns into it to do enough to give it a crippling result on the legs, and 1 damage from that spills over into the weapons as well. The Gilgamesh missiles, however, go into a building that has yet been touched because I need to start working on demo on that. The Jaguar takes advantage of the Zion rule again, and hops on over to the other side of the board through a Gaia, charges up the road, and between the flame weapons and the ion cannons overcomes the disembarkment penalty to wipe out a base of veterans. Additionally, the Eden activates and hovers threateningly over my sappers. HQ group is up, Napoleon finishes off the nearly destroyed building, puts 7 damage to a forest. The battle bus with the sappers moves up and does 4 damage to the faraway building. The Kraken puts 1 point into another building. I consider going to claw up the Jaguar with the Pizarro, but I think forestry is more important and where it's a bit more efficient, so it takes care of some trees. Shaltari Frontline group activates, and the Daimyo and its Brave squad take up an observation point on the overpass, while the other squad of Braves makes a more aggressive move, and the Pangari just chill out off-screen. Seeking revenge for their fallen friends, the veterans load up armor-piercing rounds and manage to do just enough to take out the Jaguar. Strikehawk casually flies over the Gaia and dumps some missiles into the building right in front of it. Scouts activate. The Yari fail to damage the Voidhawk, then move over to join the Braves along the edge of the field. The Tomahawk gets a shot off at the Hannibal and puts a point of damage into it, while the Arrowheads and Recluse just chill with the Pangari, enjoying the show. The Voidhawk, afraid to so much as turn due to the arrowheads right underneath it, along with the Lifthawk, manages to put all of 3 damage into the nearby forest. And that's not due to the passive saves, they just only did 3 damage. And for the last activation of the round, the 2 Circes just make a full move towards some forests that are just a little bit out of range still. Come the collateral damage, and I play explosive charges on the building that has the most tokens on it. And it goes from no damage to 2, and those 4 collateral tokens stick around. Few damage points around from the various collateral tokens, and notably the large building on the side collapses. Round 5, and Shaltari gets initiative. Unsurprisingly, the lion activates first. It moves forward, crushing the Hannibal and destroying it, and then fires into the Colossus, doing a crippling result to the weapons, triggering a damage spill around the legs, and causing a chain reaction in the Gilgamesh missiles, meaning I have no more of those left. Additionally, the Gaia activates and moves into position to shift the shield spire around on a later turn. I activate my behemoth, but first I play Intel Report to see if there's any cards that might mess with me. 2 mostly useless cards and 2 shooting cards that might help them. The Colossus moves up, kicking back the lion a few inches and doing 1 damage to the legs. Fires off its Beowulf pawns at some nearby buildings for some more demo damage, and then between the claws and the chain guns, destroy the weapons and the legs, bringing both down to 0, and the lion has been destroyed. This does not end particularly well for our large friend. The lion rolls a 1 on the destruction roll, triggering a singularity event that is large enough to destroy both the forest and the shield spire, as well as the Colossus. Shaltari infantry goes, and thanks to a reroll from incendiary rounds, the Gauss rifles of the Braves destroy the battle bus with the sappers inside of it. The daimyo and its entourage hop back into holding, while the other spirit moves into the center of the board. My 2 Circes activate, and thanks to a marksmanship card, destroy the tomahawk and 1 of the arrowheads. At this point, the only units that might have any sort of impact from Shaltari are the Braves. So rather than summarizing every single shooting action, I'm just going to run through the whole round. It's going to be a matter at this point of seeing if the Shaltari have destroyed enough of my stuff that I'm not able to do a sufficient amount of demolition damage by the end of round 8. Good progress is made on the demolition, and I also take out 1 Yeri and 1 base of Braves. Luckily for Shaltari, they get the initiative once more. The daimyo and its escort pop out of the nearby spirit, and with a play of experimental firepower on their recently disembarked Braves, as well as the existing squad, they wipe out the sappers. The various gates then activate and cluster around my flyers, hoping to get some reaction shots off. Close of round 6, and it looks like I should have no problem clearing this thing up. The 2 spirits get shot down, the Yari also gets destroyed, and the Strikehawk takes 1 damage from the reaction fire, while Circe takes another point of damage from the retaliation from the Recluse when taking down the Arrowhead. Resistance wins the initiative roll. At this point, I don't really think it matters too much because I'm just going to be ignoring the Braves and focusing on the demo anyway, so they can do whatever they want. And I was punished by that. On their activation, they destroyed my Kraken. End of round 7, it almost but didn't quite make it. There is still 1 forest with a few damage points left on it. And I get the honor of closing out the game. Or so I thought, as I don't manage to destroy the forest with my first activation. In an act of spite and a play of reactionary tactics, the Braves get 2 rounds of shooting with their Gauss rifles off and manage to blow up my Napoleon. But that, of course, doesn't actually stop me from finishing off that forest and winning the game. So this was quite fun as a variant from the typical victory conditions of finding an objective, holding an objective, extracting an objective, whatever. Both in list building and actual play, it was quite different. So I think what carried me to winning the game was a couple things. First was some very good early game command cards and rolls that got me some momentum. The other thing was that they overcommitted in both their list building and their play to defending the laser. When I realized I didn't actually really need to take it over and I could just destroy it, that meant a lot of their points in their deployment just wasn't as effective as it could be. I think overall they were a bit too aggressive, in part because this is an 8-round scenario as opposed to the usual 6 rounds. So they had plenty of time to maybe pick their battles a little better, but They were a little enthusiastic with the idea of I can deploy everything right in the center of the board and just rush in your face immediately, even if maybe Shaltari isn't really the best at. I'm still surprised that even with a pretty demo heavy list and such heavy momentum in my favor in terms of the just kills, it still took the full 8 rounds. Granted, the eighth round was just a single, well, 2 activations to finish off, and not a full series of them, but that was kind of surprising. Maybe the forests versus buildings made things different. The laser might have been more desirable if it had more hard targets like buildings as opposed to the forests that I could fire stuff like the veteran rifles. Overall, a grand time was had by us, and I hope you got a kick out of watching this video. Thanks, have a good one.